okay? Any thumbs up?
Yes, Miriam.
Thank you. So I'm really sorry. I'm having some issues with my device. So let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are calling in from today. And welcome to the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE Inclusive Education Resources, Highlights, and Discussion webinar. My name is Miriam Jafar. I'm the INEE Inclusive Education Coordinator, and I will be moderating this webinar. So before we get started, please note that International Sign Language interpretation is available for this webinar. We're committed to making this event accessible to everyone, and your International Sign Language interpreters are here to assist you. You can also, there's also automatic closed captioning is available through Zoom. To activate captions, simply click the CC or live transcript button on your Zoom toolbar. We hope this feature enhances accessibility and makes the content easier for everyone to follow. Let's go over the housekeeping points. For security reasons, your audio and video have been disabled, but you can still actively participate through the chat and the Q&A functions. You may want to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you are welcome to submit questions in the Q&A at any time. Just click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to take your questions during the webinar and to save some time towards the end of the webinar to address any questions you have. This session is being recorded, and the recording and presentation slides will be shared on the INEE website and with registrants by email. We highly encourage you to share the webinar recording, the INEE inclusive education resources that we're going to highlight during this webinar with your colleagues. Now let's get started. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see, our agenda for today includes the following items. We're going to introduce you to the Inclusive Education Working Group by showing an infographic. Then we will pause for a round of questions. But before digging into the various IE resources that INEE published recently. Once the various resources are covered, we will leave the floor to the INEE Standards and Practice Team Lead, Ariel Solari, to walk us through some highlights related to disability in the INEE MS 2024 edition. At the end of the webinar, we will share links to the resources feedback form and case study template, and then close the webinar with your questions. Let's get to know our speakers. Next slide, please. We welcome Karam Al-Amir and Kristen Kaiser, representing herself and Elena Modolo, all from the INEE Inclusive Education Working Group. Ayman Quaider, IE Consultant and IE Working Group Member, INEE Arabic Language Community Facilitator, and Ariel Solari, INEE Standards and Practice Team Lead. Welcome, everyone. Next slide, please. This is a visual that we are sharing right now. So if you're not seeing, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to describe the pieces or the different sections that are in there. So hold with me. Because this is an Inclusive Education Working Group webinar, let's start by getting to know more about INEE and its Inclusive Education Network space. We call it the IE Working Group or the IEWG. This infographic features the composition of the Inclusive Education Working Group, its main goals, the INEE Inclusive Education Community of Practice, or well known as COP, and the most recently published IE resources by INEE. As a network, INEE works for and through its members, responding to the needs members themselves identify as pressing. This helps ensure the broad EIE community or Education in Emergencies community gets what it needs to improve the work they are doing. INEE working groups are formalized network spaces that allow members to work collectively on specific focus areas, such as inclusive education in our case today. INEE working groups are composed of individual and institutional IE members who advocate for their focus area and who collaboratively develop knowledge and resources to help INEE members provide inclusive, quality, and safe education for all affected by crises. Next slide, please. We will now focus on one of the sections of the infographic, which is about the Inclusive Education Working Group membership. It is diverse. There are 39 members representing 22 countries and 27 organizations. In fact, each working group is led by a volunteer leadership team and carries out a specific set of time-bound tasks and activities. The current co-chairs are Karam Al-Amir and Ayuel Abate. Next slide, please. Another section in the infographic features the IE-related channels, part of the INEE community of practice on Slack. Slack is a communication platform. So inclusive education and التعليم الشامل, one in English and the other one in Arabic, both available on Slack, and you can follow those channels to get any news or updates or even engage in discussions. Next slide, please. Another section in the infographic covers IE newsletter. To date, we've published 4 editions of the IE newsletter with around 4,314 subscribers. There is one last section on the IE resources that I will go through, but first, let's see if you have any questions. Let me see if you've sent any questions in the chat. Thanks for Ayman, who is sharing the links to like the community of practice and whatever we are mentioning. I don't think there are any questions right now. We might take them later on. Next slide, please. So moving forward, if you have any questions, please include them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will try as much as possible to answer them. On the slideshow, you are seeing a section that features inclusive education resources developed and published by INEE over the past couple of years. There are definitely more resources that are available on the website. Feel free to check them out. So I'm going now to give the floor to Karam, Kristen, and then Ayman to walk us through the resources and the blog developed by the Inclusive Education Working Group. Karam, the floor is yours. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I hope my voice is clear. Thank you again for the introduction. And starting with the first resource.
Karam, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Would you like us to take the poll first?
Excuse me?
Or would you like us to take the poll, or would you like to start directly?
No, if it's okay, we can take the poll. Yeah.
Okay. So you will see, we're going to share with you a Zoom poll. Ayman? Yeah. So this is a Zoom poll that we're sharing with you. It's about INEE resources. How familiar are you with existing INEE inclusive education resources? There are 4 possible answers. You can pick only one. So are you very familiar? Are you somewhat familiar? Are you not very familiar or not familiar at all? Pick one. Okay, can you see the answers? Wow, mostly somewhat familiar and then not very familiar. 9% are very familiar and 15% of the participants are not familiar at all. Fine. Let's go there. Let's start, Karam, and we share the IE resources and additional and take more. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam, for the introduction. And starting with the first resource that we are featuring today, the Inclusive Distance Education Toolkit. I will try actually to answer two questions in this regard. The first is when we think, why was this resource developed? It was developed and designed to help education practitioners working in emergencies and crisis-affected contexts to support inclusive distance education for all learners, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. Since it is known that children, young people, and adults who are marginalized or at risk of being marginalized are often the first and most excluded from education during periods of crisis and emergencies. And multiple factors can contribute to their exclusion and lack of education opportunities, including intersections between poverty, gender, ethnicity, geographic location, disability, race, language, social class, and other factors that create cycles of disadvantage in education. Next slide, please. Now, the second question that I will try to answer is, what does this resource include? This toolkit includes 31 resources of various types, such as papers, handbook, reports, guides, and more. It is divided into 3 units. The first unit is about from marginalization to inclusive education. Unit 2 is about making distance education inclusive. And the third unit is about professional development for inclusive distance education. Each unit includes subsections organized in tables with resource titles, summaries, and links to the languages in which the resource is available. Now, I will invite my colleague Kristen to share more about the blog that she wrote with Elena around the toolkit. Over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Karam. So part of the work of the IEWG has been to review the resources that have been developed. And my colleague Elena Modello and I reviewed the Inclusive Distance Education Toolkit in order to better understand the resources included. And we found the resources to be wide-ranging with practical guidance, training, and printable materials for those on the ground. In the process of that review, we began to think about those users in the last category. For those needing to implement those resources in emergency and crisis situations, a fundamental question began to emerge. Can distance education truly be inclusive, especially in these settings? So in response, we created a blog to address this question in more detail, looking specifically at the issues of caregiver support, curriculum adaptation, and needing to strengthen policies around gender and disability access. So we're now asking our larger INEE community to please share your own insights and experiences by reading the blog and then providing feedback or case studies for those of you that are on the ground and whether these resources are resources that you're able to operationalize in those settings, and providing feedback or case studies in the templates that we're providing at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kristen. Now moving to the second resource, which is the Disability Inclusive EIE Resources Mapping and Gap Analysis Report. And to answer the question, why was this resource developed? Providing support and ensuring the education of all of learners with disabilities is of paramount importance in emergencies and crisis-affected contexts. However, limited evidence is available on the effective disability inclusive education policies and practices used in these contexts. Therefore, this report seeks to fill this evidence gap by mapping and analyzing the available resources that target the education and broader needs of learners with disabilities in these contexts. Next slide, please. The mapping identified and analyzed a number of 182 resources published by a range of organizations, institutes, and individuals. The resources included 30 tools, 38 research outputs, 24 policy or advocacy pieces, 17 frameworks, 40 resources categorized under other resources, and 33 resources related to COVID-19. All these resources were made available in a repository of resources. Next slide, please. Several trends emerged in the resources collected, along with gaps in their content and design. These key trends and gaps were categorized in the report under geography, emergencies and crisis-affected contexts, target audience, types of disabilities, intersectionality, grade or education level, healthcare, medical and specialized services, and accessibility. Next slide, please. In this slide and the following one, we included the recommendations from the EIE Resources Mapping and Gap Analysis report that tackle various aspects. While we won't be able to cover them in details today, we only included them in the slides to emphasize that two of the resources developed by the IE working group and that we are highlighting in this webinar aim to address existing needs. So, having said this, we invite you to consider these recommendations when planning any EIE intervention or developing resources to ensure they are high quality and inclusive of all learners, including those with disabilities. The recommendations are all detailed in the report made publicly available on the INEE website. Next slide, please. All right, on to the next again, please. Now, practically speaking, to respond to key gaps identified through the mapping exercise and the associated gap analysis, INEE, through its IE working group, developed the Disability Inclusive Education Emergency key concepts, approaches, and principles for practice, which is our third resource for today. This report can also be found on the INEE Inclusive Education resource page. So my first question again here is, why was this resource developed? It is meant to be used as a companion piece to the INEE minimum standards and to support stakeholders' efforts to be more intentional in their design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of disability inclusive EIE interventions. Although the principles address disability inclusion in education, many also are relevant for supporting the education of other marginalized or vulnerable learners in emergencies, including girls, refugee and displaced learners, and ethnic and linguistic minorities. Next slide, please. So what is this report about? To be specific, this report includes definition of key terms and concepts relating to inclusive education and disability inclusive EIE, such as inclusion, inclusive education, diversity, least restrictive environment, and many, many more. Some of the concepts are accompanied with examples, such as barriers and enablers, services that persons with disabilities can benefit from, etc. The full definitions of all key terms and concepts can be found in the glossary of this report and in INEE's EIE glossary, which is continually updated. The purpose of the glossary is to promote a common understanding of key EIE technical terms and to support the correct and universal use of these terms. In addition to the key terms and concepts, the report includes example of approaches to disability inclusion in EIE settings, which were results of the literature review, including a synthesis of the 190 coded approaches. Lastly, the main focus of this report are the 7 principles for disability inclusive EIE that we will detail in the next slide, please. Next slide, please. These 7 principles for disability inclusive EIE, which are meant to guide stakeholders working on disability inclusive education projects in emergencies and crisis-affected contexts. As mentioned earlier, the principles for practice align with the 2024 edition of the INEE minimum standards, as well as other disability inclusive education guidelines developed by humanitarian and development partners, including UNICEF, USAID, and the World Bank. To conclude, the team identified that future efforts should explore the process of localizing and adapting these principles across diverse EIE settings, and the need to improve the monitoring and evaluation of disability inclusive EIE approaches in order to understand more fully what practices and design components lead to the most effective, impactful, scalable, cost-effective, and sustainable disability inclusive EIE programming. If you would like to have a quick review of these 7 principles, we also invite you to have a look at the blog that was published by the INEE and the Global Partnership for Education GPE link that will be sent in the chat. Thank you so much. Over from my side.
Thank you. Thank you, Karam. Thank you so much for walking us through the different inclusive education resources that have been developed in the past 2 years. A kind reminder for everyone to send your questions in the Q&A box and to visit INE website for further details about the resources. Whatever we captioned in these different slides is too little compared to what the resources include. Thank you so much. Let's move to Ayman, who is going to share with us more details about one of the resources that were developed based on the mapping, which is the update of the Inclusive Education and Emergencies training module that is part of the EIE Harmonized Training Pack. Ayman, over to you.
Thanks so much, Miriam. And as Miriam said, this is the INEE developed resources on inclusive education in emergencies training model, which is basically a part of the EIE harmonized training package, set of a short of trainings models developed by INEE and the Global Education Cluster. And this resource is in fact built on the INEE Minimum Standards 2024 edition and the EIE Competency Framework, and align with the concept in the Disability Inclusive Education in Emergencies, key concept, approach, and principles of practice, which my colleague Karam talked about. So the training, which we advise everyone to have a look on it, it's very interactive and full of activities, is divided into 4 sections. Each section is of 30 minutes and aim to introduce participants to the basics of inclusive education in emergencies. So we have identified 4 objectives for this training. The first is to be able to define inclusive education in emergencies. And the second is to identify the various types of barriers to inclusion in education that affects the education of multiple groups of learners in emergencies and a crisis-affected context. And the third objective of this training is to be able to describe the various ways to overcome the barriers to education, including using the twin-track approach, provide reasonable accommodation, and universal design for learning. And the last but not least objective is to be able to describe how these stakeholders and education personnel can collaborate to support inclusive education in emergencies. If I can ask for the next slide, it's already up there. Thank you very much. So I'm going to add the model in the chat box, so for colleagues to be able to have a look. But the model includes 4 materials: the facilitator guide, the slide deck, background information, and the session handouts. I've already added the link in the chat box. I'll stop here and hand over back to you, Miriam. Thanks.
Thank you, Karam. Thank you. And thanks to Kristen. Thank you, Ayman. I'm sorry. And thanks to Kristen and Karam for guiding us through the different IE resources and sharing valuable insights with today's participants. As a reminder, they are all available on the website. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need additional support. Now let's hand the floor over to Ariel Solari, who will be presenting the INEE Minimum Standards 2024 editions guidance on disability as one of the cross-cutting issues that should be considered when using the INEE MS. Over to you, Ariel.
Thank you, Miriam. Hello, everybody. What I'm presenting now is the map of the INEE minimum standards update of 2024 and how inclusive education and disability has been mainstream in the different sections. As you can see initially in the cross-cutting issues, disability is a new topic that has been included in this update. What we mean by a cross-cutting issue is that it's a topic and a thematic that is included throughout all the domains and all the standards in the key actions and guidance notes. And these cross-cutting issues like the disability are meant to be linked to the other cross-cutting issues like mental and psychosocial support, disaster risk reduction, etc. So these are not topics that are standalone. A practical example on how inclusive education has been strength in the current edition is the standards number 5 on the standards for quality response in the domain of the quality response. The standards 5, that is response strategies, that it's meant to be an overall guidance on how to respond to the different crises, and inclusive education is at the forefront of this strategic response. The inclusive education should be the essential part of how response strategies are designed, are implemented within any crisis. By inclusive education, we are going to refer you to the INEE glossary so you can have the best definition of inclusive education, but it means to be encompassing all the different aspects of disabilities, social inclusion, and gender inclusion, and other disadvantaged or vulnerable groups that should be included in the strategic response. Next slide, please. Here we have a more nuanced detail of how the inclusive education has been included in the 2024 update. What are we looking now is education system reliance and non-discrimination, that there are key actions and guidance notes to implement the minimum standards. In the education system resilience, the system should strive to have inclusive education approach for all learners, including those from marginalizing groups. When we talk about all, we meant all. I'm not going to go into details of what that means because it's self-explanatory. But sometimes we do need to do some clarification and strengthen some of this inclusive definition, and that's why the key action of non-discrimination related to educational authorities as the main duty barriers to ensure that the education is inclusive for all people or children or youth and all learners in the different levels and all the different set of crises. So in the non-discrimination key actions, you have a set of people and sectors that should be included and take specific regards when we're talking about inclusive educations. So how all of this strength and update has been made, we purposely did a thematic review of the previous edition, the 2020 edition. That thematic review was done by 2 consultants and was called Gender and Disability Inclusion Thematic Revision of the 2010 Minimum Standards. All the conclusions of that process that took around 9 months was the sources where we collated, analyzed, and included in the 2024 edition. So this is meant to say that we did a specific consultation and a specific thematic review on disability inclusion for the 2024 edition. But to say that, I would like to finalize this small presentation and overview with a critical reflection of that process of the thematic review and the overall update process. Despite this conscious effort that I'm describing, the inputs from the disability and inclusive community were limited, meaning that even when we did the effort and we reached some of these stakeholders, we didn't have the outreach that we were willing to include in this. This has limitations, for instance, in the ways that different kind of inclusion or disability are showcased in the 2024 edition. And also there is still an ongoing thinking and ongoing discussion how the minimum standards can be better used or better contextualized, or can be better used for the disability and inclusive education community. Say that we are in the process of doing that in collaboration with Miriam on that. I'm finishing my presentation here and I give the floor back to you, Miriam. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ariel. And we're almost we're reaching the end of our agenda for today, but we still have some items in there. So before that we move to the Q&A session, we'd like to invite you to help us improve the quality, relevance, and reach of our resources. And by you, we mean all the participants and your colleagues in EIE. You can do this by sharing. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, Esther. Yeah, so on this, you can do this by sharing how you use the resources we covered during this webinar, as well as any other INEE resources, via a 5-minute feedback form and a case study template. So there are 2 ways that you can share your insights with us after that you used the resource, any of the resources that are available. This is applicable to IE resources and to any other INEE resources. So to help us improve the quality, relevant, and reach of our resources, you can use these 2 forms. If you are ready, let's turn out our attention to the Q&A session, where we can have either address any question that the participant sent, or if we need to have a kind of a discussion, like with your questions coming in and so on, we are happy to do that. Next slide, please. And let's stay here on the Q&A. Let me turn on my video again. And let's see there.
Would you like me to read the questions?
If you don't mind, that would be perfect, Emmeline. Thank you so much. And I will try as much as possible to address all the questions. But for those questions that need additional support, either like references to resources and so on, if the participants can bear with us, we can send them along with the recording. So thank you so much, Emmeline.
You're welcome. So far we've got 3 questions. The first one is from Edwin McCory. How do we become a member of INEE Inclusive Education?
Okay, so first of all, the person who would like to be an INEE Inclusive Education Working Group member needs to be an INEE member. And you can do that by joining the network if you aren't a member already. On the website, there's a section or a button that takes you to apply or become an INEE member. I would be grateful if anyone can paste that link in the chat. Then, as you answered, Emmeline, usually we do a call for working group members. Right now, there's no call for new members. However, if you are an INEE member, you would be receiving emails and updates from INEE on a regular basis. And if there's any call for a new membership, the call will be included in an email or published in an email. I hope I answered your question. If not, Edwin, please ask another one. Thank you.
The next question is from Dennis Mwaka, and it's, how can we adopt this model in the changing context and working with different governments? I did ask what he was referring to, which model he was referring to. There was no answer. So maybe Dennis can further his question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please. Just to make sure that we're answering and addressing the question as intended. So thank you, Emmeline, for that clarification. We can wait until Dennis replies.
Yeah. And the next question is from Diana Laurillard. Could you please outline the range of disabilities you cover and the different types of inclusion you include?
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting and complex question to address and to answer. All the information are included, hopefully, in the disability inclusion concepts and key terms, concepts, approaches, and principles report. So if we can send the link again, so Diana can scroll through right away. And there's a section on the disability types of disabilities that were updated by INEE, by the consultants, thankfully, because in general, in the resources, we found that there were a lot of emphasis on physical disabilities and other visible disabilities, if I may use this term. That's why we made sure that in that report, we tried as much as possible to add other types of disabilities that are usually unseen. And by unseen, I mean sometimes it would be hard to reach the learners who have this kind of disabilities. There are mental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, and others that are included in the report. That's in terms of the disabilities that were covered. And for different types of inclusion you include, I'm sorry, I don't really get the question yet. On the IE collection, on the INE website, in the IE collection, we tried lately to update the collection and the whole description, including additional terms like inclusion, inclusivity, inclusiveness, and so on. And you can see there is an image or a representative visual that represents exclusion, segregation, special education, and inclusion, and I think integration. So I hope that also helps. If not, I'm really happy to answer any of your questions. I can send you the email of Inclusive Education in the chat, and we're happy to have a further discussion about it. I hope I answered, Diana. Emily, do you think it's a fair answer?
I think it is to the best of your ability, live. There's always more, if more answers coming if we write to you and on the webpage. Dennis completed his question by saying that the model is basically the disability inclusive education. I don't know if that helps understand the question. There's a question that's maybe a bit similar to it by Ulrich Jacobson. Are the resources also relevant in non-emergency situations? And he mentions a stable country such as Tanzania. And I see also in the chat that there are questions about, whether the working groups are talking about specific countries, but the question is slightly different. So yeah, are the resources relevant in non-emergency situations?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Emmeline, I will answer this question, but I will ask my colleague Esther to take us back to, I will precise which slide, because that was one of the recommendations. To slide 16, if you don't mind, Esther.
Let me know when I'm there.
I'm sorry, I can't see your screen. Let me.
I'm in the recommendations. Recommendations 1 or recommendations 2?
Yeah, thank you. Let's stick to recommendations 1. So I'll try to answer the question, but again, I'm happy to discuss further. So one of the recommendations from the mapping and analysis report on disability-related resources, not talking only about the model of disability inclusion, the consultants find out that there's a need to pilot, adapt, and validate the resources that exist across diverse humanitarian contexts. And also, there's one on create resources to support, go beyond addressing the needs of learners, produce resources. Yeah, there's produce resources that meaningfully explore the experiences of learners with disabilities who are living in EIE context, whose disabilities intersect with other characteristics of vulnerabilities. And I'll let you know why I'm highlighting these two recommendations. Esther, can we move to the next one, please, to recommendations 2? There's also conduct additional more structured testing to assess the quality and accessibility of the resources collected. And there's one in the other report about contextualization and so on. And now I'm not sure about which recommendation it is. So going back to the answer to the question, it's definitely not like 100% sure question yet. If any country goes through crises, any type of crisis, so automatically whatever is applicable in emergency should be applicable in non-emergency situation. But what needs to be done is a kind of contextualization, adaptation of either the resource, the principle, the content, whatever. And we need to learn more about this. Tanzania or other contexts. And I remember in the second report about key terms, concepts, and principles for practice, it is mentioned that whatever is being said there or the recommendations can be applicable, or inclusivity and any inclusion practice can be applicable to all learners and to all contexts. But what we need to do is a contextualization. I hope this helps. Emmeline?
We have another question from Ahmed Kasim. What are the measures used to gauge the level of exclusion education is going through and inclusion reached after applying all possible practices?
Does anyone have an answer to this question? You can send it in the chat, or we can then type the answer. So that's an important question, but let's say that if we are different, like various practitioners, let's see. So would you like to read it again, Emmeline?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to add it to the chat so that you can all see it. It's what are the measures used to gauge the level of exclusion education is going through and inclusion reached after applying all possible practices?
So we're sending this in the chat, but I also invite Ahmed, if you're not yet a member of the community of practice, to become a member of the community of practice and to ask this question to practitioners who had joined the Inclusive Education channel, either in English or التعليم الشامل, the Arabic channel. And if anyone would like to answer this question, please feel free to do it in the chat.
And there was a question from Tom Lowe. Are there any resources to support with teacher training, specifically teacher training resources, similar to TIC Training Pack, which provides 4 to 5 day inclusive education training, specifically for teachers in crisis contexts with limited teacher training?
Wow, that's a long question. Can you say if it was sent in the chat or in the Q&A, so just I can visually look at it?
Sure. It's about available resources that would be similar to the TIC training pack for teachers in crisis, but I guess with a focus on inclusive education. That can be used during training.
Yeah, where was this question sent? I'm sorry, Emily.
I think it must have been in the chat, and our colleague who's also working on Q&A pasted it. And I'm sorry, I only see you as a chipmunk. I don't know your name. I apologize.
No, Sava. If I can have a look at it. Meanwhile, there's an idea of if participants would like to ask a question, they can raise their virtual hand. And Ayman, my colleague, can support by unmuting them if that's possible, if you would like to go there. And meanwhile, yeah, I'm looking at the question. So are there, I will paste it for everyone to in the chat again to be able to see it. And if other colleagues from the working group, co-chairs and whoever would like to jump in, also I invite you to do that. So are there any for the teacher training? Okay. From answering Tom's question about to support teacher training, I would say that the training module on inclusive education can support practitioners in general, yet not specifically teachers who would like to have more like insights about how to make education or learning inclusive. However, yeah, I'm sorry, Tom, I was reading your question. However, there's as you said, the TIC, and in the TIC, there's a chapter on inclusive education, but there are also other partners who definitely have available resources online. You can find them either in the repository of resources done, included in the that we covered in the mapping, or in the toolkit, Inclusive Distance Education Toolkit. Or also another idea, which is not necessarily a training module, but interesting and a lot of details about how education can be inclusive, that are in the pocket guide for inclusive education. Please, if you can, colleagues, if you can paste the link to the pocket guides in the chat, that would be really helpful. Because there's a lot regarding how a teacher can make classrooms inclusive and schools inclusive. There are two hands. Yeah. Who would like to go first? Ayman, you know who raised their hand first. Would you like to unmute?
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead, Wendy.
Who?
Can I think
Please.
you unmuted me. My name is Nariman.
No, we can hear you, Nariman.
Can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello everyone. Have been working with disability inclusion since 33 years. For teacher trainings, there is what's going on, and I'm going to talk about what's going on in Palestine. There is a differentiation between the theoretical part and the implementation part, or the technical part, where we face, the teachers find it very challenging to implement inclusive education on the ground, because inclusivity, it has different, we have all children from different levels, from different backgrounds, from different, there is the children with disabilities. Where the teachers find it very challenging is dealing with children with disabilities, because or behaviors, or children with behaviors. This is where we used to support in the technical part in addition to the theoretical part. And so teachers prefer to have hand in hand, because sometimes if we are dealing with children with disabilities or children with behavior development, with behavioral issues, sometimes you have to be there to support them in doing the individual education plan, or to draw the behavioral modification behavioral plan. So technical part is very important in this, in supporting teachers. We advise them also to use the universal design learning, because it covers most of the techniques in dealing with all children and meeting all the levels in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Nariman.
And
Was there any question?
I don't see any more question, and I will leave you in the hands of Charlotte, and wish you a good end of the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Emily, for your support. I think Ahmed still has his hand up. So, Ahmed, would you like to ask your question out loud?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone, for having this opportunity for everyone to join. My name is Ahmed, and I'm joining here from Nahr, from Yemen. And I'm actually, I was the one that posed that question, talking about the measures that level the exclusion, the education going through, and how can I say, or how can I gauge the improvement that my practices has impacted the inclusive education in general. Because right now, me myself, I'm leading the co-chair of the Inclusive Education and Emergency Technical Working Group here in Yemen, supporting the Yemen Education Cluster, and we're trying our best to move, the barriers and to remove the pigment on the children first, on the teachers, on everyone in the community, so we can just move from one level of just inclusion to merge the students into all one. We need them all to be one. We just need all the people in special needs and those marginalized, disabled, whatever, to be all seen as one. So we're trying to remove the barriers and to give, equal opportunity for all students to have a chance for inclusive education by all its means. So that was my question. I was not looking for a specific answer, but thinking of the whole aspect and the whole concept here of having education which is inclusive, repeats the question to myself that what are the measures that I can see, okay, that I reached the goal which I see. So the resources that were shared were really helpful. We'll be looking at it. And I would be really grateful if you can just advise on how to join, the community that you mentioned, Miriam, on the practitioners and so on, so we can just both have, mutual benefit on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. If my colleagues can send the link to the community, to joining the community of practice in the chat, I'd be really grateful. Thank you, Ayman. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ahmed, you can click on that link and become a community of practice member. Same goes for every participant who is not yet a member of the community of practice. And we can definitely chat over Slack or agree on a different time where we can have further discussion about the topics related to inclusive education.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, do we still have any questions that haven't been answered?
Yes, Miriam, there is one last question, if I'm not mistaken, that was put in the chat, which is from Ayatollah Jabarkil, who was asking about what is the difference between safe and inclusive education. And the second question was, what is the criteria for INEE membership?
Okay, let me start by the question that is easier to answer, which is what is the criteria for INEE membership? INEE membership doesn't have any criteria. It's just because INEE is an open network. So if you are working in EIE and would like to become a member, membership is for free. You just need to visit our website and apply and to become a member, and that's it. There's no application process in terms of acceptance or refusal. It's just that it's a process and you become a member. And then you can you can start receiving emails. You can also be engaged in the community of practice, be in touch with other practitioners in the field, in this or in the sector, in your country, in the region, globally, etc. So it's open for everyone. Again, I believe my colleagues are going to send you the link in the chat. As for the second part of the question, which was the first, what is the difference between safe and inclusive? and inclusive education. I will not pretend that I have the answer, but
Can I
shouldn't
try for this, Miriam, if
education be
we have
safe?
time?
Yes, Karam. We don't have time, so if you would like us to write an answer and then we share it to all participants, we can work on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that would be much better, of course.
Okay, we have your question, Hayatullah, and we will try to answer it, promise. Let me end this webinar by sharing heartfelt thanks to everyone who provided technical support for today's event: Ayman Quader, Emeline Marchois, Charlotte Tokyo, and Esther Mbao. Nothing would have been possible without you. And to all our speakers and to participants for your engagement. And to the International Sign Language interpreters, Razak and Samuel. Thank you so much. Ending this webinar.